25 years ago, this was kind of a rough street and you definitely think twice about walking it alone at night. But since the 90s, crime in San Francisco has gone way down. And not just San Francisco or California, but across the entire country. Nationwide, the crime rate is almost half of what it was in 1991. The thing is, no one knows exactly how or why this happened. Most experts say it's not one single thing, but a combination of factors. Here are just three plausible explanations. First, mass incarceration. We've been jailing more Americans at record rates and crime has gone down. And you might think, well, that makes sense. You're locking up more criminals, so of course there's less crime out there on the streets happening, and to some extent you're right. The Brennan Center for Justice says that mass incarceration accounts for a slight drop in property crime since 1990. Things like robbing houses, stealing cars, and so on. But the Brennan Center says you can't actually attribute the drop in violent crime to mass incarceration for a few reasons. One is that increased incarceration has meant that more non-violent offenders have gotten locked up, which obviously doesn't have a big impact on violent crime. And the Brennan Center's numbers show that increased incarceration doesn't even necessarily deter crime, which might help explain why in some large states like California, the prison population has decreased and crime has still gone down. So obviously jailing more and more people doesn't explain why crime has gone down. Another theory, new police strategies. In the 90s, increased funding put more police officers on the streets, and some argue that those numbers helped reduce crime. But others say the evidence isn't totally consistent. In San Diego, for example, there were no extra police officers, and yet crime still went down there. Then there's police strategies like broken windows, which targets low-level crimes and misdemeanors. Things like selling loose cigarettes on the street or smoking weed out in the open. The jury's still out on how big of a role that helped play in reduced crime. Finally, the introduction of something called CompStat definitely seems to have had an effect. CompStat basically allowed police officers to measure crime stats and target specific neighborhoods and crime for the first time starting in the 90s. No matter what, it's likely that police did play a role in the crime drop, but that's not the only explanation. The third big factor, the economy. The idea is that when more people have jobs, there's less crime. As unemployment went down in the 90s, crime also went down. And as unemployment went up in the 2000s, crime also saw a small increase. It gets complicated, though, when you consider that the recession in 2008 didn't actually lead to an increase in crime. So what about income? As per capita income grew in the 90s, crime decreased. In fact, the higher the average income in the state, the lower the crime rate. But more money could mean more incentive for criminals, like in neighborhoods that have a big economic disparity. So obviously the crime drop is pretty hard to explain, and there's a whole bunch of other theories. People drinking less, better access to abortion, decreased crack use, Obama mania making folks feel good in 2008, our aging population, and less exposure to lead. Yup, lead. So what do you think is behind the drop in crime? Let us know. Back in the 1960s, our incarceration rates were the same as Europe's. And if you think there's just more crime here, that's not true either. Our crime rates